we hope that you have a really rewarding day talking about teaching and how we teach well for our student learning outcomes. So we're so happy to support this. If there's anything that we can help you with during the day, with parking or anything at all, please let us know, and we hope that you enjoy your day. And I want to introduce you to Kathy Scott, who's our VP for Academic Affairs.
Hi, good morning, everyone. We just both wanted to come in and say thank you for coming. We're really happy to be hosting this today. The honors programs really provide such a great experience for our students, and it just gives them an edge for transfer, and it makes them feel really confident going forward. And I've been involved in honors programs for the last few years at other institutions, and it's just been very exciting. And I know we have a great program here under Jeff, and we're building it. I don't know if your programs are growing as well, but it's we put a new course through at the board meeting last Tuesday, and we just really want to see it grow and see more students know that they are at that level. It just is such a great thing, and we're all going to be competing with you in Irvine, right? And and best of luck to all of you in that competition, and welcome. Thank you.
One more note as we get started. We are filming the event today, and there are with our various school calendars, and we're still on winter term here at Long Beach, and I know a number of people are in that situation. Some other schools have already started the spring semester, but I know that there are a number of people who were hoping they could be here today who could not, and so our ability to film the proceedings, I think, is a nice thing to be able to do. But I just wanted everyone to be aware of that. Before we get started, I would like to just go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves, and especially which institution you're from, and but also what discipline that you're coming from. I know Hiro would be interested in having some of this information too as he talks to us in just a couple minutes here. So let me just start. Oh, one thing about this room. It's really difficult to hear people sort of on the other side of the room if you don't have the microphone. So we do have a couple handheld mics to pass around, and I will start with Joaquin.
Hi, I'm Joaquin Arias, Honors Transfer Director at Los Angeles Harbor College. I teach chemistry. And this year, I'm also the Vice President of the Honors Transfer Council of California. We'll talk a little bit about the conference a little later, I guess. And let me hand it off to Tim.
I'm Tim Adell from Victor Valley College. I'm an honors coordinator at Victor Valley. I'm also the editor of Building Bridges, the selected abstracts of the conference.
I'm T.L. Brink. I teach psychology at Crafton Hills College.
I'm Francisca Mejia Lopez. I teach Spanish here at LBCC.
Hi, I'm Matthew Atkinson. I teach political science here at LBCC.
Hi, Wendy Koenig. I teach art history at LBCC.
Liz Nash. I teach life sciences at LBCC.
I'll keep the trend going. I'm Velvet Pearson, and I teach English at LBCC.
In the English quarter here, I am Laura Scabuzzo-Wheeler. I teach our English 3H.
Gina Valentino, English, LBCC.
Jen Liddell, same.
GDO Counseling, Long Beach City College.
Anne-Marie Nunag, Counseling, Long Beach City College.
Janae Hunt, Sociology, Long Beach City College.
Amy Fredericks, I teach astronomy here at Long Beach City College.
Brita Hallinan, I teach English at El Camino College in Torrance.
Cheryl DiBartolo, I teach anthropology at Crafton Hills College.
Judy Cannon, I'm the honors coordinator at Crafton Hills College.
Good morning, I'm Margot Lovett. I teach history, humanities, and gender and sexuality studies at Saddleback College.
Alana Rosenberg, honors chair, Saddleback College, and co-chair of transfer relations for HTCC.
Hi everyone, Kathy Denver. I am an honors counselor and I primarily work with F1 international students
at Foothill Community College up north.
Good morning, Bernie Day, our Honors Program Director at Foothill College in Los Altos Hills.
And queen of all things.
Well, once again, welcome. Thank you all for coming. Just in terms of the day today, the morning session is going to be the presentation by Hiro Sasaki on mental health and honors. We will have lunch at about noon. And then during the afternoon, we'll have some breakout sessions discussing aspects of teaching and honors. In terms of one more sort of logistical matter, the restrooms are, if you go out these doors here to the left, and they're on your left, right there. There's food in the back, which people are welcome to grab at any point during the day, and there will be lunch coming in sometime later. But I won't tell you till it's here, and we're ready for that. So anyway, but now for the main presentation of this morning, at one of the last HTCC meetings, we had actually really interesting conversation about the growing challenges that we're facing in all of our classes, but it's sort of unacknowledged, or it tends to be more unacknowledged in the honors classes, the mental health issues that we're facing with our students. And as this discussion was going on, and people were talking about the real need to have more discussions this way, a light went on in my head, and I said, wait a second, I know somebody who can address this subject really, really well. And when I talked to him, he was willing to come in and talk to us. So Dr. Hiro Sasaki is the chair of the psychology department at the University of the West. He is also a clinical psychologist with a practice in marriage and family counseling here in Long Beach. And he has actually much more interesting details about his background that I'm going to let him give you as he talks to you about this issue of mental health and the way that it impacts our honors students. So, Hiro, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jeff. I want to let you know there's room at the table if you want to pull up a chair up here. And what a fantastic opportunity. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful to Jeff for asking me to come and talk to you. And I just want us to take a moment, because you probably rarely do. I just want us to take a moment for you to just recognize and attend to the well, I guess a non-secular way of putting it would be the sacred work that you do. That basically you're here to help the best and brightest of our students to attain higher education, and with that comes their entire being. It's not just their minds, but you're also feeding their entire person, and that's just a rare and wonderful thing, and it can become so easy to forget that all we're doing, we all have just one thing in common. We're helping human beings to increase their happiness and decrease their suffering, and that's it. And with all the administrative stuff and government stuff and rules and regulations and contracts and whatnot, it's really, really easy, and departmental and university politics and intra-college politics, and it's all too easy to forget that our mission, our vision, our main goal is to serve students, which is amazing, and I just love that. So thank you so much. My name is Hiro Sasaki, and good morning. Welcome to you all. What a cool thing. So I'm here to talk to you about something that actually appears oxymoronic to start with, which is at-risk honor students. And it's hard to even pair those two things in our minds. And what I thought I'd do, we thought for a moment, should we give you homework to do before you got here? And Jeff's like, no, that's a bad idea. Faculty, staff, we don't like doing homework. We just like assigning it. And so what I thought we would do is just start with a TED Talk and to provide you with some data. So today is going to be designed in a bad news, good news kind of way. So we're going to start with the bad news. And before I do that, let me tell you a little bit about our university. You've probably never heard of us. I'm from University of the West, which is a private, nonprofit, non-sectarian, accredited university based in Buddhist wisdom and values in Rosemead. And you may not even know where that is. You probably think that's in Northern California. It is. We're in the other one. Rosemead is a city just south of El Monte, south of Alhambra, just south of Pasadena, basically, at the 60 and the 605. And we're tiny. We have about 385 full-time equivalent students. We have basically 5 graduate programs. We've got religious studies, our 1 PhD program, a master's program. We have a chaplaincy program for a master's in divinity. We have, they also have a doctoral program now. It's the Doctor of Theology in our chaplaincy program. In psychology, I train master's students in marriage family therapy for licensure in the state of California. We also have, for our undergraduates, we have psychology, English, liberal arts, and business. And half our student body are international students. I remember I heard F1 from over, yes, wonderful. Half our students are international students, primarily from Taiwan and China, but also from 42 other countries in the world. The other half of our students are at-risk, first-generation college students, primarily from Highland Park, interestingly enough, and all with monolingual Spanish-speaking parents whose average education is about fourth grade, and so in a lot of ways, our student body reflects some of the at-risk students that you all see. And what's really interesting is with stuff like Promise Pathways and with the threatened dissolution of college funding and what I expect to see in the very near future is huge increases in and you're probably already seeing it, huge increases in at-risk students coming to you. And that's both good news, has both good news and bad news. The summary of the bad news is that you're going to see a lot more evidence of mental illness. The really good news is we get to catch it. You get to help shepherd students into treatment. Which is, it's not as, when medicine, people in medicine, behavioral medicine or regular medicine, what doctors might often call real medicine, when they refer to early intervention, they mean kids. But you and I know that if we don't catch it here, it can go uncaught for a lifetime, and that's an even bigger tragedy. So let me introduce you to some data through a TED Talk, and after that, I'll worsen that news. I'll let that news sink in, and then I'll worsen that news, and then we'll go into some solution. So wonderful. Great. Awesome.
In the mid-90s, the CDC and Kaiser Permanente discovered an exposure that dramatically increased the risk for 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the United States. In high doses, it affects brain development, the immune system, hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. Folks who are exposed in very high doses have triple the lifetime risk of heart disease and lung cancer, and a 20-year difference in life expectancy. And yet doctors today are not trained in routine screening or treatment. Now, the exposure I'm talking about is not a pesticide or packaging chemical. It's childhood trauma. Okay, what kind of trauma am I talking about here? I'm not talking about failing a test or losing a basketball game. I am talking about threats that are so severe or pervasive that they literally get under our skin and change our physiology. Things like abuse or neglect, or growing up with a parent who struggles with mental illness or substance dependence. Now, for a long time, I viewed these things in the way I was trained to view them, either as a social problem, refer to social services, or as a mental health problem, refer to mental health services. And then something happened to make me rethink my entire approach. When I finished my residency, I wanted to go someplace where I felt really needed, someplace where I could make a difference. So I came to work for California Pacific Medical Center, one of the best private hospitals in Northern California, and together we opened a clinic in Bayview Hunters Point, one of the poorest, most underserved neighborhoods in San Francisco. Now, prior to that point, there had been only one pediatrician in all of Bayview to serve more than 10,000 children. So we hung a shingle, and we were able to provide top quality care regardless of ability to pay. It was so cool. We targeted the typical health disparities: access to care, immunization rates, asthma hospitalization rates, and we hit all of our numbers. We felt very proud of ourselves. But then I started noticing a disturbing trend. A lot of kids were being referred to me for ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But when I actually did a thorough history and physical, what I found was that for most of my patients, I couldn't make a diagnosis of ADHD. Most of the kids I was seeing had experienced such severe trauma that it felt like something else was going on. Somehow, I was missing something important. Now, before I did my residency, I did a master's degree in public health. And one of the things that they teach you in public health school is that if you're a doctor and you see 100 kids that all drink from the same well, and 98 of them develop diarrhea, you can go ahead and write that prescription for dose after dose after dose of antibiotics, or you can walk over and say, what the hell is in this well? So I began reading everything that I could get my hands on about how exposure to adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. And then one day, my colleague walked into my office and he said, Dr. Burke, have you seen this? In his hand was a copy of a research study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. That day changed my clinical practice and ultimately my career. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is something that everybody needs to know about. It was done by Dr. Vince Felitti at Kaiser and Dr. Bob Onda at the CDC, and together they asked 17,500 adults about their history of exposure to what they called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Those include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, parental mental illness, substance dependence, incarceration, parental separation or divorce, or domestic violence. For every yes, you would get a point on your ACE score. And then what they did was they correlated these ACE scores against health outcomes. What they found was striking. Two things. Number one, ACEs are incredibly common. 67% of the population had at least one ACE, and 12.6%, 1 in 8, had 4 or more ACEs. The second thing that they found was that there was a dose-response relationship between ACEs and health outcomes. The higher your ACE score, the worse your health outcomes. For a person with an ACE score of 4 or more, their relative risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease was 2.5 times that of someone with an ACE score of 0. For hepatitis, it was also 2.5 times. For depression, it was 4.5 times. For suicidality, it was 12 times. A person with an ACE score of 7 or more had triple the lifetime risk of lung cancer and 3.5 times the risk of ischemic heart disease, the #1 killer in the United States of America. Well, of course, this makes sense. You know, some people looked at this data and they said, come on, you know, you have a rough childhood, you're more likely to drink and smoke and do all these things that are going to ruin your health. This isn't science. This is just bad behavior. It turns out this is exactly where the science comes in. We now understand, better than we ever have before, how exposure to early adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. It affects areas like the nucleus accumbens, the pleasure and reward center of the brain that is implicated in substance dependence. It inhibits the prefrontal cortex, which is necessary for impulse control and executive function, a critical area for learning. And on MRI scans, we see measurable differences in the amygdala, the brain's fear response center. So there are real neurologic reasons why folks exposed to high doses of adversity are more likely to engage in high-risk behavior. And that's important to know. But it turns out that even if you don't engage in any high-risk behavior, you're still more likely to develop heart disease or cancer. The reason for this has to do with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain's and body's stress response system that governs our fight or flight response. How does it work? Well, imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus sends a signal to your pituitary, which sends a signal to your adrenal gland that says, release stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And so your heart starts to pound, your pupils dilate, your airways open up, and you are ready to either fight that bear or run from the bear. And that is wonderful if you're in a forest and there's a bear. But the problem is what happens when the bear comes home every night. And this system is activated over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging. Children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation because their brains and bodies are just developing. High doses of adversity not only affect brain structure and function, they affect the developing immune system, developing hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. So for me, this information threw my old training out the window, because when we understand the mechanism of a disease, when we know not only which pathways are disrupted, but how, then as doctors, it is our job to use this science for prevention and treatment. That's what we do. So in San Francisco, we created the Center for Youth Wellness to prevent, screen, and heal the impacts of ACEs and toxic stress. We started simply with routine screening of every one of our kids at their regular physical, because I know that if my patient has an ACE score of 4, she's 2.5 times as likely to develop hepatitis or COPD. She's 4.5 times as likely to become depressed, and she's 12 times as likely to attempt to take her own life as my patient with 0 ACEs. I know that when she's in my exam room. For our patients who do screen positive, we have a multidisciplinary treatment team that works to reduce the dose of adversity and treat symptoms using best practices, including home visits, care coordination, mental health care, nutrition, holistic interventions, and yes, medication when necessary. But we also educate parents about the impact of ACEs and toxic stress the same way you would for covering electrical outlets or lead poisoning. And we tailor the care of our asthmatics and our diabetics in a way that recognizes that they may need more aggressive treatment given the changes to their hormonal and immune systems. So the other thing that happens when you understand this science is that you'll want to shout it from the rooftops, because this isn't just an issue for kids in Bayview. I figured the minute that everybody else heard about this, it would be routine screening, multidisciplinary treatment teams, and it would be a race to the most effective clinical treatment protocols. Yeah, that did not happen. And that was a huge learning for me. What I had thought of as simply best clinical practice, I now understand to be a movement. In the words of Dr. Robert Block, the former president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today. And for a lot of people, that's a terrifying prospect. The scope and scale of the problem seems so large that it feels overwhelming to think about how we might approach it. But for me, that's actually where the hope lies. Because when we have the right framework, when we recognize this to be a public health crisis, then we can begin to use the right toolkit to come up with solutions. From tobacco to lead poisoning to HIV/AIDS, the United States actually has quite a strong track record with addressing public health problems. But replicating those successes with ACEs and toxic stress is going to take determination and commitment. And when I look at what our nation's response has been so far, I wonder, why haven't we taken this more seriously? You know, at first, I thought that we marginalized the issue because it doesn't apply to us, right? That's an issue for those kids in those neighborhoods, which is weird because the data doesn't bear that out. The original ACEs study was done in a population that was 70% Caucasian, 70% college educated. But then, the more I talk to folks, I'm beginning to think that maybe I had it completely backwards. If I were to ask how many people in this room grew up with a family member who suffered from mental illness, I bet a few hands would go up. And then if I were to ask how many folks had a parent who maybe drank too much, or who really believed that if you spare the rod, you spoil the child, I bet a few more hands would go up. Even in this room, this is an issue that touches many of us. And I'm beginning to believe that we marginalize the issue because it does apply to us. Maybe it's easier to see in other zip codes because we don't want to look at it. We'd rather be sick. Fortunately, scientific advances and, frankly, economic realities make that option less viable every day. The science is clear. Early adversity dramatically affects health across a lifetime. Today, we are beginning to understand how to interrupt the progression from early adversity to disease and early death. And 30 years from now, the child who has a high ACE score and whose behavioral symptoms go unrecognized, whose asthma management is not connected, and who goes on to develop high blood pressure and early heart disease or cancer will be just as anomalous as a 6-month mortality from HIV/AIDS. People will look at that situation and say, what the heck happened there? This is treatable. This is beatable. The single most important thing that we need today is the courage to look this problem in the face and say, this is real, and this is all of us. I believe that we are the movement. Thank you.
I love that malapropism, we've seen the enemy and they is us. if we're the same, if the distribution of people in this room is the same as the population that was studied in the ACE study, there's about 25 of us here. 5 of us experienced childhood sexual abuse. About 1/5 of us. About 6 of us, 1/4 of us, were beaten enough as children to have bruises left the next day. 1 out of 3 of us has been in a relationship, in a couple's relationship, where there was domestic violence, where there was beating. There's physical violence. Good 6 of us, 1/4 of us, have alcoholic relatives. 1/8 of us, about 3 of us, would have seen a mother being beaten when we were children. And that goes for our students as well. But here's the horrible thing. I'm going to worsen this even more. Our students, those that are underdocumented, those that are underinsured, remember that this sample population, 70% had insurance, 70% college educated. That means for our students, the at-risk students that we have, the numbers are far higher. And it's even worse than that too, because my background is in multicultural counseling. My degree is a PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Southern California, and where I studied with some of the best minds in multicultural counseling. And one of the things that's seeing a lot more print today in our circles is multi-generational transmission of trauma. Multi-generational transmission of trauma. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of research in that from survivors of the Holocaust, for example. But we've also taken a look at refugees from all around the world. We look at war trauma both in the West and the East. And I'll put air quotes around West and East for the post-colonials and the post-structuralists. And so it turns out that unless we're able to confront and face the fact that many of us, too, are, or perhaps should be, consumers of mental health services, it's important for me to let you know that I'm in recovery, that I'm in recovery from severe mental illness, and having that alongside me, having suffered from depression, having suffered from suicidality, having suffered from substance dependence, doesn't prevent me from being here in front of you and being useful to you. And the thing is, I had immigrant parents who I don't have any of those ACEs at all. Sure, I might have alcoholic relatives, but in Japan they don't talk about them, so I don't know. But what I do know is that we've studied the effects of immigration, even with both of my parents, white collar, college educated. We moved here to follow my dad to get his PhD in Canada. Followed him around the southern states and the western states for his postdocs. Ended up in California for his when I was 8 for his job that he finally got in Altadena at Avery, where he was a researcher in inorganic chemistry, and I couldn't figure it out. And well, first of all, we don't really think of when we think of trauma, we think of threats to the person, and we rarely think of things like the trauma of acculturation. We rarely think of things like the types of oppression and stereotyping that we experience. One of my mentors, Dr. Ruth Chung, who is now chair of the Marriage Family Therapy Program at the University of Southern California, her research in the late 80s looked at family conflict for foreign-raised parents and their US-raised kids. And the #1 predictor of family conflict, you could probably guess by now because it's become disseminated and widely replicated with many different cultures, is differential acculturation. We all know kids acculturate a lot faster than parents, and the students that you see, you could probably see that if they have foreign-born parents, that one of the biggest things, especially if your students are girls or women, like the gender differences in what I believe my autonomy and my right to have here is at vast odds with my parents. And we forget that rarely do we see anyone, and I will count you, whose parents or grandparents haven't suffered from war, from dislocation. And it was really revealing to me about a decade ago when I went to Japan with my father and my brother, and my father is a highly rational, highly logical man. And we decided we want to go to the ramen museum in Yokohama because it sounded fun, and it's all dioramas and it's all set up to be like mid-century modern Tokyo. And we go in there, and it's 1940s era Tokyo. It's all dark, narrow alleyways. There are air raid sirens going on in the background. There's music happening from 1940s airways. And my father, within 5 minutes of getting in there, we get our little ramen tickets to try all these different ramen styles. And he gets incredibly uncomfortable. And he has to leave very soon. And I start realizing, oh my God, my father suffers from untreated post-traumatic stress disorder. I had known logically, but I had completely forgotten that their house was bombed out. And he knows from his lived experience when he was in first grade, he knows when the bombers would go over and firebomb Tokyo, sometimes the pilots and the bombers on the planes would struggle not to puke into their masks because they could smell burning bodies. He knows that smell. I've never smelled that. He knows what that's like. And suddenly, so much of my childhood made sense. How he would become emotionally dysregulated, how he seemed so logical one moment, but something would trigger him, and he would fly into a rage. And then I realized, maybe I'm not free of all aces after all. So there's multi-generational transmission of trauma. There's the ACEs themselves have been studied. This study, one of the most, I believe, the most important study in medicine, in behavioral medicine, to come out of the late 20th century. This was 1995 to 1997. It's 20 years old. And many of you have probably never heard of it. It's available, of course, it's Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. If you just look up ACEs and children, then it'll pop right up. You can get the transcript of it. You might even want to show it to your students. So, one reason why this, I love how she ends at the end, where she has a hypothesis that perhaps one reason that we're not looking at it is it's difficult to look at our own suffering and our own family's suffering. It's difficult to look at that. It's difficult to seek treatment for that. And I believe, she said that she had an off-the-cuff remark, we'd rather have our pain, and I disagree. I disagree fundamentally with that statement. I believe that the number one reason why there isn't more help seeking is an emotion that now, through research, that we've discovered is international, something that we're capable of from birth, which is shame. Now, if we had a day-long thing, I would show you a couple other TED Talks by a woman named Brené Brown. Her last name is Brown, her first name is Brené, rhymes with Renee, B-R-E-N-E. She's our foremost researcher on shame. And what she'll let you know is that the way that shame works is everyone has it. Well, she doesn't mention this, but unless you're a psychopath or a sociopath or you're on the autistic spectrum, then you might not have it. But other than that, we all have shame, and we all know exactly how it feels. There's a physiology to shame. There's the phenomenology of it is there's a sinking feeling in our bodies that we're all familiar with. And the tendency internationally from children studied in tribes in Africa to villagers in India, all over where there's a sinking feeling, there's a tendency of the head to fall down, the body to kind of slump in on itself, and an inability, and a complete kind of phenomenology of disconnection from you and everybody else. And the problem is, the less we talk about it, the less we talk about shame, the more we have it. But we can't talk to, like, Brene Brown does a lovely job of saying that the way we talk about it, to whom we talk about it, we have to be really careful. We can't talk about it, talk about our shame to somebody who's like, oh, yeah, whatever, and let's do this thing that's actually important. Somebody who will dismiss it. We can't talk about it to somebody who's going to look down upon us and say, oh, poor you. We want to talk about it to somebody who'll say, oh, you're talking about, oh, me too. I've got that too, and all of a sudden that's incredibly relieving for us. This is one of the reasons why support groups and recovery organizations like 12-step groups are incredibly powerful, because there's this identification that detoxifies shame. Right? All right, and that's one of the things we can do. So my ethic as an educator, as a person, as a clinical psychologist, is that, and when I train my master's students, my psychotherapy trainees, the way I onboard my faculty, I'm never interested in asking you or anyone else to do something that I haven't done, that I'm not currently doing, or that I'm not willing to do. And I basically want everybody that I work with to have that same ethos. And so let me turn directly to something that came in an email chain from Jeff. There was an attendee to the NCHC conference, and here's what a colleague of yours said, in terms of what I found most helpful from the mental health and honors presentation. I think it was the reinforcement that college students from all campus groups deal with mental illness. Honors students are often overlooked because they succeed. But it may be because they succeed, we need to take more care with them. The students in the audience repeatedly said that they often felt pressure to not come forward or not seek help because they had to maintain this appearance of control and success. I guess this resonated with me because I want to be someone who students feel comfortable talking with. Now, if you think about more self-disclosure, when I think about my own implicit prejudice, the prejudicial thoughts, the stereotype thoughts that come up for me and come up for all of us, really, if we're honest with ourselves and with others. One of the foremost of them is ableism. Like when somebody pulls into, in a busy parking lot, into a handicapped space, and that person gets out and walks confidently out, and the first, I'm ashamed to admit this, the first thought that comes to mind is, that guy ain't handicapped. And I forget that the vast majority of handicaps are invisible. And I forget that mental illness is the #1 cause of disability in the world. In fact, and the reason I can say that is that one tiny subset, well, it's a pretty huge subset, but one subset of mental illness, depression, is the #1 cause of disability in the world. And we all too often can't see it. I was just having a conversation with our chief academic officer yesterday, as we are working on a strategic plan to take us in the next 5 to 10 years. And I'm talking to him about how I and my faculty are spending an inordinate amount of time with students who are the active help seekers, the ones that are crying out for help over and over and over to anyone who'll listen. And we spend such a lot of time with them that we miss the silent sufferers. Your students, the bulk of your honor students, we miss the silent sufferers. We miss the ones that are high performing but high suffering. Now, if you want to have perhaps one of the most chilling and best examples of how success in your classroom is a poor measure of how somebody is doing, think about one of the largest populations where successful, which is such a bizarre adjective, successful suicide is most common. Japanese male teens and young adults. High performing in school, high performing in college, and their depression goes invisible. Cultural shame about depression or mental illness. In the case of East Asians, in the case of Confucian-based cultures, if there's something wrong with me, there's something wrong with my entire lineage. I'm shaming my ancestors, I'm shaming my family. So there's the invisible disability. So I'll go on with this quote. Another point brought up in the session was that students wanted to make sure that faculty realized that they were not making up their feelings of anxiety or depression. And they didn't want faculty to tell them to buckle down or just get over it. One of the things I contributed to that is that I shared that I have two 18-year-old children who suffer from anxiety and other mental illness. A difference between the generation of students that we have and previous generations, or our own generation, is that the current generation has words for their feelings so that they can express them. While some of these mental illnesses might be more common now, they have always existed. And those students in previous generations that exhibited these traits just slipped away because we didn't know how to talk about them or how to deal with them. I think that any session with honors directors or faculty has to include recognition by the faculty or directors of the validity of the issues that students are facing. If we minimize these issues, we're closing the doors on a potential source of support for the student, and we might also contribute to their anxiety and depression. So, I had three takeaways, and I think I've substantially taken care of the first one. The first issue is that I want you to take away from this session today is the problem's bigger than we think it is. Things are much worse than we want them to be. The two other things that I want to be able to do with the rest of today, oh yeah, there's a clock right up there, is to provide you with information on how and to whom to refer, and to advocate for you and your college to bring in mental health first aid to your campus, for your students to be trained, for you to be trained, for faculty and staff to be trained. And what I'm planning to do is to talk until about 11:15, and then shift to some Q&A, because I thrive on Q&A. I love that. Oh, and if you have questions, don't feel free to interrupt. I don't get derailed by questions. So if you have questions at all, feel free. Oh yes, wonderful. Oh, but before you do it, just hold. If you can hold on to that one moment. And the bonus takeaways that I would love to be able to do, but I'd be perfectly fine if I don't, because I'd be happy to be invited back. The bonus takeaways are one of the things that that your students might come to you with that might disguise mental illness are production problems, difficulty producing or performing in your classroom. So whether this is in the forms of quote-unquote writer's block or performance anxiety, test-taking panic, etc. So one of the things I could provide you with is some best practice taken from both English in writing process, as well as from psychology, so that's something that I'd be happy to provide you with. Just more about my background. One of the ways that my experience with mental illness manifested, the way that I know Jeff and Laura and my wife Velvet, we all met in graduate school. We all met at the University of Southern California, which is the second PhD program that I dropped out of, because I read everything. I would go to class completely prepared. I was one of those students that you as instructors both delighted in and dreaded. And the reason why is that I would be very happy to converse in class, but your challenge was to not stifle my excitement, but also help create room for everybody else in the classroom. And yet I couldn't write a lick. And I had a full ride along with them to USC, teaching in the freshman writing program. And I was teaching writing, and I couldn't write. And I was plagued with shame and guilt and horrible hypocrisy. And I left there. And the wonderful news today is that I now live and work in an ethos where I believe that my greatest strengths, our greatest strengths, also disguise our greatest weaknesses. And as we go through our struggles, our weaknesses are the seeds of our greatest strengths. And so today, one of the things I do is I provide, well, for most people, I say I provide cognitive behavioral therapy because they understand what that is, but what I really provide is acceptance and commitment therapy for graduate student writer's block, for high-stakes testing panic, such as the jurisprudence exam, the medical licensing exam, the GREs, the SATs, et cetera, and the LSATs. And so I've been able to turn everything around to provide assistance to those folks that were like me, and I was in a position to not have the help that I needed. And isn't that part of what we all do? Is we want to provide what wasn't available to us, so that the next generation could do the same thing at a higher level, right? It's educational evolution at its best. So that would be one bonus takeaway. A second bonus takeaway would be one of the most important practices, I believe, built out of one of the most important measures to come out of psychology in the 21st century, something called the self-compassion scale and self-compassion practice. So that'd be bonus. If we can get bonus points today. If we don't, that's okay. I'll come back and do those things. But the three main things: the problem's bigger than we think it is, how and to whom to refer, and how and why to get mental health first aid, which I would argue is as important as you and your faculty and your staff knowing CPR and first aid. Great. So wonderful. Let me, you have a question here? Oh, beautiful. There's another one.
Jeff. Yeah, it's a comment and a question. I think that underlying everything that you said is the fact that we as a society still assign great stigma to mental illness. And I think it's that sense of being judged on top of being an internalized sense of shame that is culturally determined, right? That I think has to be addressed in order for us to then help our students, right? And so I think that's probably an issue that's beyond the scope of what we're going to do today. But I think until we as a society address how we think about mental health, then this issue is not going to be resolved.
What you were saying about shame as a reason that we are marginalizing this, I was thinking of a different reason for marginalizing it. And I think of my own childhood experiences, a family that has not only people in it who are the source of the traumas, but all of the people who tried to help. And it's not a matter of, I feel shamed. I may not want to believe that they failed. You know, I know how hard they tried to shield us from things. And I would rather, what she said, I'd rather be sick. I would rather be sick than blame the people who loved me for not taking that ACE and making it go poof away the way they wanted it to.
I just wanted to talk into a microphone. So, no. I wonder if you could take a couple of minutes at some point today to give us some recommendations on how we as instructors can stay healthy while we try to help our students. I feel like I can feel my whole body tensing up, and I agree with everything you're saying, and I've seen it, and I just also feel so strongly that we live in such a pervasively, determinedly sick society, and we're seeing our students maybe 4 hours a week, and we're teaching content, and I just wonder, this isn't asking for tips on like, how do I squeeze this in between like MLA citation format, right? Like, it's not like, I feel very committed that this is an ongoing part of my presence in the classroom, but I wonder if you can just give us some suggestions or some perspective on how we ourselves can stay healthy, especially when we just start to feel that sense that this is just so overwhelming, and that for every one student who trusts us enough to say something, there are so many others who are never going to bring this up, and knowing that even if we're able to refer them, we're all still going out into this larger society that's just really effed up, to speak like an honors teacher. So if you could address that at some point, I would be greatly appreciative.
Just a quick response that, at least for faculty, I do not know if this applies for, well, we're all faculty here. So if you haven't done this, we do have a great benefit. It's MHN, Mental Health Network, and we can get access through HR, the 1-800 number. And, I've definitely used their services for multiple things over the last 21 years, and I have appreciated what I've gotten. And one of the things we get is like, I think, unlimited counseling and mental health support. So we definitely shouldn't be ashamed. It's what helps us be able to do our job effectively.
Okay, sorry to interrupt this further, but I was wondering if maybe at some point you could help us figure out how we inhabit the different roles. Sort of, we are, I think, in the eyes of many of the honor students, the taskmasters, right? We're the ones making them do the things that are causing their stress and dismay, especially in a writing class. Like, it's horrible, right? But then they'll come to me and confess some horrible situation going on, and I want to be deeply, understanding about that. But at the same time, essentially the solution, I think, often for them would be, don't make me write this paper, or don't make me turn it in. And I think often I find it difficulty there. I can be somewhat flexible, but on the other hand, it isn't fair, right? If everyone else is somehow managing to turn this stuff in. So anyway, if you could help us think about how to show that we understand, but also, convey that our role is that they learn to do these things, and it's very difficult to say, like, oh, you don't have to write this research paper, which of course is causing trauma at the moment, right? But is what the class is about. So that's something I've struggled with.
Wonderful. So just so I can make sure to I've been rehearsing what you've been saying so I can keep track of it all. So first, recognizing that what we have to do is destigmatize mental illness as a society. And of course, it starts with us. Also, as we do that, one of the biggest threats to destigmatizing mental illness is this threat of, am I parent blaming? Does this mean that I'm putting the fault on my parents? How it is that we can engage in self-care, in balance, because this is, for each of us, this is our instrument. And if this falls apart, everything else falls apart in our work. And how do we do that? MHN, a great way to do that, but I'll talk about that a little bit. And then finally, when we're talking to our students, because most of you are not clinicians, if not all, how do we balance being supportive and maintaining class rigor and maintaining class requirements? So does that fairly cover all of that? Oh, lovely. Okay, good. I'm an ethicist. And so I really, really love thinking about biomedical ethics. And I really love teaching ethics. I did it for 6 years, and now I have a fantastic colleague that does our law and ethics class. And one of the fundamental ideas in biomedical ethics is, well, here, just a brief overview. First, for me to be helpful and not harmful. For me to honor your autonomy, so I'm not colonizing you, I'm not forcing you to do something, I'm not enslaving you. For me to be just, so that I treat everybody fairly and to their own needs. For me to have fidelity, for me to be, if I say I'm going to do something, to do that thing, or if I say I'm not going to do something, I'm not going to do that thing. And one of the ideas in terms of that goes along with all 5 of those principles is the idea of informed consent. In other words, to the best of my ability to let you know what you're getting into before you get into it, so you can sign on for it with full knowledge. And so what I like talking to students about from the very first day, and I got this from teaching writing, was letting people know that that we all have this weird paradoxical role where we're there to nurture growth and learning, and we're also there to grade and judge. And we usually don't use the term judge, because usually when we think of judgment, or my chief academic officer is currently, his current thing about me is he wants me to stop using the term gatekeeping. He says, it's freaking everybody out. You're freaking out the Dean of Student Affairs. She thinks you're talking about discrimination and injustice. Right? And not knowing that, well, he knows because I've explained it to him, but because I've done a poor job of letting the rest of our university know that in our marriage family therapy program, I am bound by California law and ethics to be a gatekeeper for the profession of psychology. So I let all of my entering psychology master's students know that once they're in our program, they're not the most important person in the room. The most important person in the room are all the patients that they may be able to harm or help. And closely underneath that is them. And so with undergrads, what I let them know is I have to occupy these two roles that seem paradoxical and seem to interfere with each other. And where my role is to help, but my role is also, I have to wear another hat, and I have to grade. And I let them know that it's not just what I feel, that there's a clear rubric, which you all have for all of your classes and all of your assignments. And it's managing that dialectic. And when I use the term dialectic, I don't mean the modern version of dialectic of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, like with Hegel. I'm talking about a postmodern dialectic, a Zen dialectic, where we can hold two completely competing ideas in our minds at the same time, and the paradox incorporates the essence of what we do. For instance, as a therapist, my job is to say, I accept you exactly the way you are. You're okay the way you are, and I'm going to help you change. Right? Or as the Zen master Shunryu Suzuki says, you're all perfect just the way you are, and there's room for improvement. So, and I'll return to that idea of walking that middle path between these two difficult and fraught extremes. Sometimes it feels like Scylla and Charybdis, doesn't it? Where it's like we've got the cliffs, we've got the whirlpool, where we have to navigate in between, and it's fraught. In our master's program, one of the things I have our students do, and we give them informed consent from long before. Our literature shows it, and our catalog has it, our website has it, and when students come in, prospective students come in, I let them know in campus tours, in our interview, and is that we require our students to do a lot of introspection, just a lot of it. And one of the main things, since we're a marriage family therapy program, is we have our students write about their experiences of being parented. And one of the things that I need to let them know from the outset is, as you're writing about your own traumas, whether it's with a big T or a small t, when you're writing about your experiences of being parented, the biggest danger that's going to prevent me from doing it, that's going to make me self-censor for public view, or it's not really public, it's just to the instructor, but for, quote, public view, is that I don't want to seem like I'm parent blaming. And what I let them know is I let them know about that apocryphal native tale of where the elder says, "Oh, the world rests on the back of a tortoise," and the young native says, "Oh, but what does the tortoise stand on?" And the elder says, "Oh, it's tortoises all the way down," which is how trauma works. There's one of the founders of marriage family therapy, Murray Bowen. Murray Bowen, who first had us start looking at family trees from a therapeutic standpoint, that are called genograms. But basically these family trees that we have our students write out that look at family patterns. Who's fighting with whom, who's abusing whom, who's drinking, who's not, who's supporting the drinker, who's like all that stuff. Bowen said that if we can trace our family histories back 9 generations, we would see the same patterns back then unless something huge, catastrophic, or transformational comes in and happens to change those patterns. 9 generations back, if your family has been in the United States, that could go all the way back to the Revolutionary War. So if you think about the little weird, crazy stuff that drives you nuts when you go back to your family, like, and you're thinking about like the 3 days of like when fish goes bad or when your family drives you crazy, those same patterns may go all the way back 9 generations. So we're not parent blaming, because hurt people, period. And so that kind of informed consent, I think, helps a lot to detoxify. Another thing that I believe helps to detoxify is what you'll want to do is you'll want to search deep and maybe work with your therapist if you have one, or find one if you want, if you don't, about disclosing your own experiences with mental illness, or whether they're your own or whether they're of close family members, so that they know that you know, so that there's a fantastic story that came out of what's that government show that we're binging from the 90s with Martin Sheen? That's right, West Wing. Season 1 of West Wing. There's this tale that comes out of there, which is like a guy falls into a hole. A guy falls into a hole and he's yelling outside of the hole and he's saying, "Oh, help me, help me!" And because he can't get out, the more he tries to get out of the hole, the worse the hole gets. And a doctor comes by and he says, "Doc, hey, can you help me?" And he said, "Absolutely. Here, I'll fill out a prescription. Go and get that filled." And so he's, "Well, that doesn't help me." And a priest comes by and a priest says, "Well, Father, can you please help me?" "Oh, absolutely. Here's some prayers for you to say." And then a friend comes by and he says, "Hey, buddy, dude, can you help me out of the hole?" And the friend jumps in the hole with him. And this freaks him out. He's like, what are you doing? Now we're both screwed. And the friend says, "No, buddy, I've been here before. There's a way out." That's if that's part of your experience, you can share that, and that instantly detoxifies. Instantly. In terms of balance, I love talking to my students, my clients, to faculty about the horrible stress chiasmus. So chi, X, Greek. And you all know this chiasmus intimately. I'm just putting a weird jargon term onto it. So the more that stress increases throughout the semester, you can start out your semester after coming back from break. Everything is balanced the way you want it to. You've had walks in nature. You've had time with loved ones. You've had yoga retreats. Your nutrition is perfect, except for those little binges. But that's okay because you've had the exercise to make up for it. And things are good. Exercise, nutrition, sleep, everything is a perfect balance. And as school starts coming up, then like stress starts like edging upwards, right? And if you're like me, I'm really, really good at keeping stressful things out of my awareness until they're forced in, and suddenly it's like, ah! And what happens as the semester increases and stress and demands increase, what happens to self-care? It's a chiasm, it goes down. And that's okay, as long as it doesn't continue to go down, right? I think it's important to normalize for us, for our students, for my patients, for my faculty, that everything in life is about rupture and repair. Rupture and repair. We want everything to go, like that. But no, it's going to go up and down. Like a dear friend of mine who suffers a lot of physical ailments, he says, "Hey, you know what? When I'm in the hospital and my heart monitor isn't going up and down, I'm dead." So he really embraces the ups and downs, the highs and lows of life, because it really shows that he's alive. And with someone with the physical ailments that he has, he's very, very grateful to be alive. And whenever he mentions that to me, I remember, I can actually be grateful for all the crap that the university is pouring on me and all the problems that are around. I can actually be grateful for all those things. And then I can also seek interventions that might help. And one of my favorite things to do is, and I think this addresses both, is your compassion, which might lead to your helplessness. Your compassion when you're sitting with a student who's telling you all the stuff that's going on for them, and you're like, oh, and in the back of your mind you're going, "Oh, I didn't know a human being could bear all that and still live and function," right? And you're talking to them, and somehow it seems a little bit relieving just to be able to talk to you, just to be able to talk to you. And what I've trained Velvet to do is you're completely allowed to go, "Hey, you know what? I know some folks at Student Health. I know some folks that might be able to help you over there. Here, let me go see and make sure they're still in, and call them up and get a hold of them." And then it's like, "Hey, let's take a look." And they're like, "Student Health, I might be a little extreme." And you tell them, well, has it been helpful to talk to me like this? And they're like, well, yeah, because I know you. And well, right, but you wouldn't have known me if you hadn't met me. And so what I want to do is I want to help you to go have the same kind of conversation that you're having with me. The same kind of conversation, except they know what they're doing. and they can help you. And if you've ever seen it, and one of the best reasons to see a therapist, other than it can actually help you, is that then you could tell them, if you're willing to, I've been in this spot, and I've resisted therapy, if this is true for you. I've resisted therapy for and one of the things that happens to so many people is like, why did I wait so long? Why did I cheat myself of this experience for so long? Why did I cause what I now know is unnecessary suffering? Well, if a literalist would say, well, it was clearly necessary because that's what it took to get me into therapy. But there's still a part of the critical mind that says, why did I engage in that unnecessary suffering? So, in one sense, we're not part of the 1% at all. We're not part of the 1% who, but we're part of the tiny minority in California, or actually in the world, or not the world, because the world has much better, well, the first world has much better insurance than we do, but in the US, where your insurance is amazing. The state of California, you know your insurance, and you know that you underuse it, right? Whether it's going to the different specialists that you're able to see, there's no time, I don't have time for a gastroenterologist, they're gonna have me eat weird, right? You have access to so many amazing services, including mental health care. And one of the things, my profession is notorious. Psychologists have just recently outstripped dentists for the highest number of successful suicides, like by profession, right? So, woohoo, yeah, yes. And what that means is that the Greek demand of self-examination, doctor, heal thyself, goes to you too. What all of us do is we're equipping our students with a way to thrive in the world. And if we're not doing the same things for ourselves that we have, and part of what we get to do is we get to show them things that they're embedded in, resources that they're embedded in, whether it's through language or STEM or whatever that you're teaching, whatever you're connecting them to. And we're saying, look, this knowledge, these skills, these are available to you. And if you take on the mantle of the ethos of I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I'm not doing, that I'm not currently doing, or that I'm not willing to do, then the challenge, the gauntlet is down. I double dog dare you to do the same things for yourself that you hope for your students. To engage now. And you're thinking, well, things aren't that bad right now. What I tell my students and what I tell my patients is actually, if your level of suffering, if you think about the 10-point pain scale, right, from 0 to 10, 0, none at all, 10 the worst I can imagine, most of us have experienced like if we look back, you can think back to 10-point pain, whether it's emotional pain, spiritual pain, physical pain. Granted, if you're at 10, please seek help. However, with emotional, psychological struggles, what better time than at the beginning of the semester when things are actually not as crazy as later on, or even before the semester begins for many of y'all. Here's the analogy. I want my students, my patients, I want me. I want to learn how to swim in the shallow end of the pool with a friend who knows how to swim, as opposed to waiting until the Titanic goes down and I don't get a lifeboat. Right? So, what I urge you to do is to go seek help when your pain, when your struggle, when you're suffering is like a 3 or a 4. You're like, oh, I can handle this. This is fine. Right? Do it when it's a 3 or 4. Learn to swim. Get the skills while you're in the shallow end. Another way that I really like to detoxify mental health problems is by letting people know. My experience is that all of us are really, really good at feeling bad. We all are. If you think about the suffering that your experience causes you, you know that the ways that you suffer you've probably had online since you were a kid, right? Like I like telling people, my suffering skills, I walk around with a really critical mind, and these are skills that I didn't know were skills, but my critical mind is like, oh, hero, you suck more than anyone's ever sucked before, and it just follows me around. Now that's not a problem. It's not a problem that follows me around. All of us have critical minds. All of us do. The problem is that I'll believe it and I'll do what it says. And even that's not a problem. But the real problem is that I'll do what it says over and over and over, not knowing that what I'm actively doing without my knowledge is, or consent, is that I am implicitly and unconsciously or subconsciously practicing my skills of feeling bad over and over and over again. And were they shown to me? Most of them were modeled for me. Most of them were modeled for me by my parents, by those around me, and some of them weren't modeled for me. Some of them were results of immigration, dealing with microaggressions and prejudice, dealing with being this weird Japanese kid where I wasn't around other Asians except for my family until we came to California, and suddenly I'm surrounded by Asian people. And if you're an Asian like me, then they have like a name for that. That's like either like banana or Twinkie. Like yellow on the outside, white on the inside. So I don't even fit with Asians, and I don't seem to fit with anybody. And I turn into the kid that most kids are because our biggest problem is that we compare our insides to other people's outsides, and we always fall short, don't we? Except for those times when in hubris, it's like, oh, you are stupid, and I'm the only one who knows, and man, that's a lonely existence. And either way, I'm separated from you and separated from my solution, which is connection to others and being of love and service to others. And so I let people know, hey, my students, it sounds like your key feeling bad skills are like, it sounds like you're really, really good at getting anxious. Yeah, I am. Maybe you need to go to an expert who knows how that works and knows how to give you the opposite skills. Right? It sounds like you're really good at getting depressed. Yeah, my mind, me too, man. My mind tells me exactly how to get depressed. Oh, like in cognitive psychotherapy, there's the triad of cognitive triad of depression. A pervasive negative view of self, world, and future. Oh, I suck. You and the world suck. Oh, it's gonna suck forever. If you're in Los Angeles County, there's an app that you can get onto your Android or your Apple device, and it's called the Profiles of Hope app. Profiles of Hope is the Los Angeles Department of Mental Health, and it's their app. Or you could just go directly to profilesofhopela.com. And on there, so basically on your phone, you can have all of the numbers at your fingertips for referral. Things like the suicide hotline, things like the warm line, the teen crisis hotline, the domestic violence hotline. And on the app itself, it provides you with access to all of these fantastic resources. Now, if you've never heard of the National Alliance of Mental Illness, this is a consumer-driven, family-driven organization. These are either people in recovery from severe mental illness or family members of those in recovery from severe mental illness. They are more than happy to come and visit you in your classroom and give presentations about mental illness. And because mental illness touches every single one of us, whether personally or proximally. Oh, lovely, the emergency services goes to an error page. That's always reassuring. Oh, an important thing for you to know is say you don't have the app, say your phone is in your car, and say you forget Profiles of Hope, or even if you get the Profiles of Hope, the emergency page is down. You can always dial 211. 211 is the mental health hotline for LA County. It's also used in many other counties. And 211 is basically the 911 of mental health. They will answer all of your questions. If you have someone who seems to be experiencing things that you don't think are real, they can help you with those kinds of psychoses or delusions. If you have someone who's suicidal and in danger of harming themselves, they can connect you with hospitals that the student can go to, the bulk of the students that'll come to you will be students who aren't in such severe crisis, but they're in crisis enough that if things keep going, they might end up there. And so usually they're coming to you to reach out because you're the only person they know of the only person they can trust. And so it's important for you to have access to 211 and to these crisis hotlines, and to be able to refer, to be able to walk them over to the Student Counseling Center to get them connected. And one of the things I love doing is being able to connect from one warm body to another. And because having that personalized service, and I know that Velvet's done that a few times, walked folks across campus over to student health. I don't know if you know, but the tradition in our federal government is for the First Lady to create a project, a program, or to befriend a nonprofit or a cause. And Michelle Obama, her cause was basically mental health. And Mental Health First Aid is basically a training program that is available for free. I know that Long Beach City College has hosted Mental Health First Aid for the community in the past. And what I would urge you, and the way it's set up is, like if you go on and watch some of the Mental Health First Aid, like public information videos, it's replete with everyday folks and celebrities as well that popped up on the screen, basically saying, you know, as a result of taking mental health first aid, like there's like a construction worker who was driving across a bridge and saw someone on the ledge, and where he pulled over, and using the skills they learned in mental health first aid, helped that person to come down off the ledge and to get him to a hospital, and these are skills that you can have, and that your students can have. And as I mentioned, I believe that this is as important as getting trained in CPR and in first aid. Now, even if your college can't get it together soon enough for you to get it done, yes. So even if your college can't, if you just go to mental health first aid and you just click on find a course, you can see already that these are all free, and there's a couple coming up in Long Beach. There's a couple in downtown LA. There's one in Santa Ana. There's one at Hathaway Sycamores. I don't know if that's a Pasadena one. And if you look on the side, these are all general mental health first aid ones. If you all have folks come to do a training on your campus, you can even have them come in and do a higher ed training that's specialized for your population. Let's see, should I return? Right now I'm just kind of thinking out loud in terms of, because it's like 5 to 11. I can go on to the bonus items because that'd be really easy to pop into, or I could go directly back to you because I just downloaded a bunch of information into you, and you might have, you're working with it, you might have some more questions or comments. So the self-compassion scale, I mentioned that I believe this is one of the most important measures to come out of psychology in the 21st century. It was published in 2004 by Dr. Kristen Neff, an experimental psychologist at the University of Texas at Austin. And it's one of the scales where, like, psychology, evidence-based psychology is borrowing heavily from millennia-old wisdom of Buddhism, and where so much of that is now being tested out by science. And that's my area of expertise in terms of therapy. And the self-compassion scale, one of the things I do is I have my students, I have my patients, I have my faculty go online. You go on here and you can take the self-compassion scale. You could take it. And what I have them do is I have them printed out, and then I have them, like, and I would encourage this for you, to do the little tiny short videos on how to increase self-compassion. Now let me explain self-compassion to you. Self-compassion basically is made up of 3 factors that have two parts. So the first factor is self-judgment. As you know, that's one of my feeling bad skills. Self-judgment versus self-kindness. Self-judgment versus self-kindness. Now, it turns out that I have really, really good self-judgment skills, as you might have guessed. And it also turns out, and these are the shrinky jargon term is these are non-orthogonal. In other words, these are non-correlated. In other words, these may have nothing to do with each other. So it turns out that I have fairly good self-kindness skills. I just don't apply them. Right? And so, so part of it is remembering to apply them. So self-judgment, self-kindness, that's factor one. Factor two is isolation versus common humanity. Right? Think of the old Far Side cartoon where it was like one box, and on the top corner the kid is coming out into junior high with the tray, and the thought balloon is, oh no, everyone's staring at me. And it pulls back in the rest of the frame, and everybody in the cafeteria has the same thought balloon. Isolation versus common humanity. And the third factor is mindfulness versus over-identification. Over-identification might be thought of this way. One of the problems with the English language is that the verb to be followed by first-person subject, right? Preceded by the first-person subject. So I am sad, I'm angry, I'm hurt, I'm depressed, I'm anxious. Chomsky talks about this. It's like an equation, isn't it? It's an algorithm. It's an algorithm that dooms us and reifies, makes a thing out of this adjective, makes a thing that crosses time, that is actually a descriptor of what's happening right now. But we believe that it's just like anyone who's struggled with an emotion or with a mood. When I'm depressed, when I experience depression, the problem is that it's as if I'm wearing depression glasses, and I see the entire world through depression. And when I train students or colleagues or patients in mindfulness practice, one of the things in mindfulness is to pay attention to our current experience as it comes up, as it goes down. And so I'll have patients who suffer from something that's called borderline personality disorder, where as a result of doing mindfulness skills and emotion regulation skills and interpersonal relationship skills and distress tolerance skills, they end up talking funny. They end up saying things like, oh, depression is arising in me. And really just kind of eliding or undercutting the weird equation that is, I am depressed, hero equals depression. And so mindfulness is just being able to notice that these thoughts and feelings, they ebb and flow. If you struggle with either depression or anxiety, I'll give away psychology for free, which is one of my favorite things to do. One of the things that you can do is you can walk around, like if you're currently anxious, like struggling with anxiety now, you could walk around and you could do your best to notice all the times that anxiety isn't on you. Same thing with depression. If you're walking around depressed, you could or here, what's one of the common descriptors that we use as educators? I'm stressed. I'm stressed. And if you're struggling with stress, one of the biggest favors that you can do yourself is walk around being curious about those moments when you're not experiencing stress. And what you'll discover is your entire day is sprinkled with them, and they provide us little vacations from our stress, but we don't experience them because we are under the commandment of this equation that says hero equals stress. I am stressed, which unfortunately has kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, also has confirmation bias. I'm going to ignore all the evidence that doesn't confirm my view and only attend to the things that confirm my view. And so that's mindfulness versus over-identification. In fact, if I'm wearing the I am stressed glasses, it's important for me to occasionally, throughout the day, try to take off the glasses and just notice that stress is something that goes up and down. Right? And remember that the one thing that I can consistently do, here, another side note here, let me jump over here. Psychology loves panic disorder. Loves panic disorder. And if any of you have had a panic attack where you might have gone to the hospital or wanted to go to the hospital because you thought you were having a heart attack, and then you get that annoying thing where it's like, no, this is in your head, this is psychological, and it's like, oh, it's so demeaning and it feels horrible. But psychology loves panic disorder because we're really, really good at fixing it. And the way that we fix it is here's a course of treatment for panic disorder. First, the assessment, make sure you actually meet the criteria for panic disorder, and then give you informed consent. Here's what we're going to do. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you all these ways of relaxing, because you're really good at being stressed out. That's an evolutionary thing that Nadine Burke-Harris was talking about. We're actually evolutionarily really, really bad at relaxing. What I'm going to do is give you some relaxation skills so that you can actually practice the feeling good skills, so that you can use those to override, replace, or modify the feeling bad skills that you have, the skills of getting panicked. So after you're really good at that, then what we're going to do is we're going to create panic attacks in session when it's safe. And I will never let you leave if you still have panic on board. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cause the panic, then practice the relaxation. Cause the panic and practice the relaxation. And what you'll discover is you have complete control over both. And that's a great example of finding ways to I'm seeing the world through this panic, and then if I practice these relaxation skills, I can finally take them off for a moment and watch the anxiety rise, watch it pass away, and that's the mindfulness piece. And it's through each of these things, practicing the self-kindness when the judgment comes up, and even part of an example of that is like, it's so difficult. It's so difficult living with my mind that tells me all these really mean things. It tells me things that if anybody told any of my family members the things my head tells me about me, I would want to kill them. And so, that's so difficult doing that. That kind of, even with self-judgment on board, I could practice self-kindness about having self-judgment on board. And with isolation versus common humanity, this is just one of the things about being human. This is part of the human legacy. This is part of what we get to carry with us. I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who does this. There's vast research. In fact, it's fairly unusual. This came out in 2004. Now it's 2018. There's over 500 empirical studies that are published on our website. She just provides them for free if you want to check them out. That have used the self-compassion scale and examined how. In fact, you've probably already heard the difference between self-esteem and self-efficacy. For years, education was saddled with this idea of we have to build up students' self-esteem, we have to make them feel good about their education. And then Saturday Night Live, about, a decade ago, made fun of that, about our nation being filled of the ignorant and uneducated, we're happy being uneducated and ignorant, right? And whereas self-efficacy was published in 1995 by a psychologist named Albert Bandura, and self-efficacy is a better predictor of educational outcome than self-esteem. Self-efficacy, it's something that even if you don't know the word, we all do, which is helping our students to recognize that they have mastery over something in a particular domain, that they're able to do something in a particular domain. And I went there because I lost my train of thought. Self-mastery. Now I'm doing conversational archaeology and trying to go back and figure out how did I end up here? Because I want to be over there. Well, I have no idea. So, but what I do know is that self-compassion. Yes. So. Self-compassion is a better predictor of well-being than self-esteem. Self-compassion is a better predictor of well-being than self-esteem. Because self-esteem can prevent me from taking the actions that I actually require that are invisible to me because of my self-esteem. And for a number of other reasons as well. So that's my little piece on self-compassion. I hope you look into it. I hope you fall in love with it. Neff also has a TED Talk that you might enjoy. Before I move on. Any questions about self-compassion and the self-compassion scale? Self-compassion is a better predictor of well-being than self-esteem. Yeah.
In terms of the isolation versus common humanity, I have students who suffer with the fear that they're imposters and are going to be found out, if not at our school, then after they transfer. Can you talk about that a little?
Let me ask you, is there any of you here who've never had that experience? So one of the best things that we can do, in my experience, is to let our students know that. Let our students know that. In essence, eliding the vocabulary, especially if it seems sexist, of like just, oh honey, oh sweetie, oh man, me too. All of us, and this is part and parcel of trying on a new identity. This is actually a predictable stage. This is something that everybody goes through. Right? And part of what we get to do as educators is we get to normalize based on research. We get to normalize human experience based on science.
Okay, this will sound unkind, but what do we do when we have students who in fact are imposters? They are not at the same level, as their fellow honor students. They don't seem to be performing at a level that allows us to pass them. And without crushing their hopes and dreams, how is an appropriate way to say, not that they are imposters, but that essentially, I struggled last semester with a person who had an extraordinary sense of his own abilities, and he truly was the lowest performing student in the class. And every time he came to see me, we would sort of bump up against these very different views of his abilities, and that was very frustrating. Not that I want to say, like, you're terrible, but, he couldn't read a page. And he's in a class where we're routinely reading 30-page articles, and he would say, I can't do it, and he would admit that and yet believed himself to be ready for the president.
Thank you. Oh, okay. I'll be happy to summarize. So if I understand your question, Laura, you're wanting to know what to do with someone who has an overinflated sense of their ability and seems to defy any intervention, as opposed to actually here are your educational deficits, here are your performance deficits, and they can't see them because, no, I'm a great student, I'm the best student of all, and I don't want to crush their soul or their motivation, but I want to give them a reality check. How do I do that? Is that right? Great. My default answer might, I think today it's the emerging theme is knowing that there's science around it and self-disclosing. Right? This powerful pair. So because of the current administration, there's some fantastic social psychological research that's evolving, and there's this term that you need to know, and it's a wonderful term. And it used to have a very specific and narrow psychobiological definition, and the word is anosognosia. Anosognosia. A, without, nozo, of and pertaining to disease, gnosis, knowledge or wisdom, where I am without knowledge or wisdom about the fact that I'm suffering from a disease. And I'm not saying that this person is diseased, but I'm going to go to an analogy that may be a good fit, which is what the current social psychological research is about. Classical anosognosia is looking at things like brain injury and post-brain injury not knowing. Like there's one form of aphasia, which is problems with speech, that comes out of injury to the temporal lobe. And it's where the individual, after a brain injury, is attempting to speak and they believe that these are words, and their brain is working fine except for the production, and what comes out is the description of it is wonderful, the experience of it must be horrible. What comes out is word salad. Word salad, and they don't know. Another example of anosognosia is in dementia studies. Now, with the most common form of dementia, with Alzheimer's dementia, in early periods, people know. People know. And in middle periods, people sometimes know. But what increases is the anosognosia. I don't even know what I remember and what I don't remember. I don't even know that it's not currently 1975. So it's come out of this research, or the social psychology research that's come up recently. Google the term everyday anosognosia. And if you Google the term everyday anosognosia, it turns out that low-performing people, some low-performing people, some people of low ability, low achievement, may not even know that that's where they are and have overinflated views of their ability to do what they cannot do. And you could see why that might be coming out a lot with the current administration. There's a similar thing that happens that is insidious for you and me, which is we underestimate the difficulty of doing what we've already struggled and forgotten the struggle of learning how to do. A couple of things. One, I'll remind you of education psychology. One of the greatest developmental education psychologists is a mid-century Russian psychologist named Vygotsky. And Vygotsky was a student of Jean Piaget. Jean Piaget is the great cognitive psychologist of development, and he studied his kids, and he would watch them develop, and so many of his teachings are still valid today. And so his student, Vygotsky, he basically said that what we need to do is, and you've probably heard this language, we need to scaffold our students. And what scaffolding our students means from a Vygotskian view of educational psychology, what that means is that we have to find out what it is that we need to continually assess what our students can do without our help. And we never want to ask them to do this. Right? There's horrible examples of that, actually, historically, such as at one point there were grants for teaching children reading, and we would offer them financial rewards for reading, which sounds like a great idea. It increased reading for so many folks, except, well, even for folks who already liked reading. However, once you took away the financial rewards, the people who had a quote-unquote an internal locus of control, the people who just loved to read, the kids who loved to read, their love of reading decreased as a result of rewarding something that already provided an internal reward. So we never want to do something for a student that they already know how to do, right? So we want to continually assess that. We also want to continually assess what students cannot do. And we never want to ask them to do what they cannot do consistently, right? Because that's demeaning, demoralizing, and demotivating. What we want to do is we want to always assess what students can do with our assistance. And as we continue to help them to do that, that's what scaffolding, that's the scaffolding is. Well, as we continue to do that, then that thing that they're doing soon becomes something that they could do on their own, and we no longer want to help them with that as we assess that. And we want to assess the next thing. So two things that come to mind. First, there are, let me give you another definition. And I'm not diagnosing the student, but all diagnoses are on a continuum. In fact, if you look at the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is the pediatrician's desk or the physician's desk reference for mental health folk, I had one supervisor who, in retrospect, provided me with Buddhist psychology supervision. He self-disclosed to me that nearly every single one of these disorders I have. It's just that for something to be a disorder, it has to impair functioning significantly or cause significant distress. And it's just I'm not at that level, but I have all of these to some extent. Now, that said, the medical definition of a delusion is a fixed, in other words, unchangeable false belief that you all can see ample evidence doesn't exist, but I can't. But I can't. And if you've ever hung out with someone with a delusion and you try to convince them that what's going on for them is false, one common thing that would happen, like let's say the delusion is they're all after me, they're infiltrating the people around me, and then if you confront somebody like that on that, a common result can be, oh, you're one of them, right? And so we become part of the delusion. But there are also everyday delusions that we can have. Right? One of the ones with mental health is one of the delusions is, I've got this, everything will be fine, when historically the pattern is for things to be fine until they're not fine. And the not fine kicking my ass every single time, and while they're not fine, I'm like, oh, I'm never going to let this happen again. But then when they're fine, I'm like, no, things are good. But then if we actually look and become honest with ourselves with that pattern, we can dissolve that delusion in ourselves and go, actually, no, I need to learn how to swim in the shallow end. I need to actually find the skills that will help me have these kind of living skills, these feeling good skills. I can replace, modify, or reduce the feeling bad skills, right? And this is also one of the places, Laura, where I believe that the rubrics are vital, like grounding specifically with specific examples here over and over and over are things that you have been unable to do. And if reading is one of the self-disclosed one of them, part of what obviously we're trained and required to do is have people ingest knowledge, be able to operate on the knowledge within in some way, and then either first be able to just reproduce the knowledge, but also to manipulate and provide altered knowledge based on previous knowledge. Right? And if you can't even do the first part, there's no way to do the second. And that's where I would start. But of course, there are always going to be students where a small subset of students, but unfortunately they may be the vociferous, stubborn, potato, stubborn, persistent. There may be the vociferous, loud, needy ones that take away an exorbitant amount of time. Here, let me give you a graph that you might like. The graph that I love going to my boss with, the chief academic officer, is I have this much responsibility, but I only have this much authority, and then I only have this much support. I can only do what's between here and here. Right? So he's all right, I need to do this, and this. And I'm like, okay. And knowing that I can't fit 10 things into a one-thing day, which one do you want me to help me to triage? Which is the bleeder? Which is the most important? Help me to do that one, because I'm not going to be able to do all of these. And the problem is that the students who take our time, but there's a term by one of my teachers that he used to use that he doesn't use anymore, and I don't like using very often because it can feel discriminatory and unfair, but it's such a descriptive phrase. It's a help-rejecting complainer. Help-rejecting complainer. And what we can do is we can try to scaffold, but if all of our attempts fail, the problem is that all of us, unfortunately, we know what works for most people, and so we want to apply it more, and it's the same problem as going to another country as American and falling under the illusion that if I just speak slower and louder, somehow they'll understand me. right? Which never seems to work. It only makes people mad and disdain Americans even more. So to find that place which will be different for each person, where you're getting diminishing returns of your precious time, and because all of us at some point will have to confront during the semester the horrible reality of, am I providing too much energy and time of these precious resources that all of our students have a right to and that we have a responsibility to provide for them? Am I providing too many resources to someone who may be beyond my help right now, or just for today? Like today, maybe I can't put 4 hours into helping this person. Perhaps today I have to stop it at 45 minutes and then move on to the next person because it's unfair. And because the horrible reality that I keep confronting and that my other full-time colleague in psychology Dr. Coleman keeps confronting, is that in the past we've spent so much time with the high demanding students that are excelling students who we could nurture are missing the nurture, and our silent suffering students are either missing being assessed by me as silently suffering, that I could be helping. There's all these other areas of the teaching portion of my job description that I am actively failing at by putting too much time into one. So to me, it's an ethical decision of, I don't want to be harmful to you by either crushing you, or so I want to try and find whatever that middle road is of being able to communicate. At the same time, I also don't want to do my best to provide a benefit for you with really small returns when I can be providing smaller interventions for a greater number of people with huge returns. So again, I don't believe that there's any clear answer, but this might provide some ways of kind of figuring out what the algorithm is today for you and for a particular student. I hope that helps. Awesome. It's 11:25. I'd love to entertain more questions.
Thank you. We come from the super intense Silicon Valley. A lot of pressure on our students, and we're on the quarter system, which is fast, fast, fast. And so we attract a lot of students who think that because we're next door to Stanford, that they'll be able to move from us to Stanford, and their parents put a lot of pressure on them as well. So it's a tough balancing act between being realistic and being encouraging. There's actually been a big rash of suicides in our area. I think 6 young students have gone in front of the local train because of college pressure. So it's very pervasive. So we're trying to figure out, how to help students who are under enormous pressure from their parents, that it's Berkeley, Stanford, or nothing. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. So how to help students that are high performers who are under high pressure. Again, I like the combination of science and self-disclosure, personally. There's a book that you don't need to read, but if you want to, it's wonderful. It's a book by MacArthur Fellow Sapolsky, and he has a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And the reason that zebras don't get ulcers, he argues, is that they don't have as developed a prefrontal cortex, as much of a prefrontal lobe as human beings do. And as my mentor, Dan Siegel at UCLA, will describe, one of the reasons why we excel at civilization is also one of the same reasons that we commit suicide, which is mental time travel. We're able to travel into the future, and we're able to predict with great accuracy or with tragic inaccuracy what the probable future will look like. And as I described, depression will narrow that future, as will anxiety. Like anxiety will catastrophize as will depression. For every Stanford representative that comes to your campus to recruit students, I believe it's just as important to have folks from Silicon Valley to come and provide alternate routes. I believe that it is just as important to have people come in and say, look, I wanted to die too when I didn't get into Cal or Stanford. I didn't want to end up at a state school. I didn't want that, but I did it anyway, and it didn't get in the way. I believe that those kinds of, and connecting students to mentors, I believe that layered mentoring is one of the things that, I'm a big fan. I like the Tom Sawyer model, except with a little bit of a twist, because Tom Sawyer, he got all of his friends to do this onerous chore, right? But I don't think it's onerous, and B, I don't want to be like Tom Sawyer, getting everyone to paint a fence so that he can kick back. I want to be right there with them, painting, and going, isn't this amazing? Look at before, after, isn't this great, right? One of the biggest problems that confronts our students is perfectionism, and I would argue that that one way of looking at this problem is the dark side of perfectionism. Perfectionism works really, really well for a small percentage of the human population, folks like Olympic athletes. Folks who do the thing where high performance psychology, sports psychology, what they'll do is they'll look at the kinesiology, they'll look at what the body's doing, they'll videotape like runners or swimmers, and then they could take that data and make micro changes to what they're doing, so that again they're scaffolding. They're like, well, I can't do this part, but with your help, I can do this little thing, and they'll improve their time by microseconds until their seconds, sometimes minutes, pass. And what those folks are able to do is to take this information and bracket the idea of failure, as opposed to let me just succeed at this. As well as, when they're not bracketing the idea of failure, to use the stories of Edison inventing the light bulb, where he failed over 400 times trying to create a filament using things like hair, which must have smelled awful, and he never saw any of those things as a failure. He saw each one as a successful elimination of what doesn't work. I believe that one of the things that we need to do as educators is to extol the virtues of failure, and also to talk about and to detoxify its greatest threats. At Naropa University, which is one of the largest Buddhist universities in the West, in Colorado, they let their students know that one of the things that they're cultivating in their students is discomfort. Like, they're letting them know, we want you to be uncomfortable. And part of what they're doing, there are these two mid-century psychologists named Yerkes and Dodson. And the Yerkes-Dodson rule is basically, if you think of a normal curve, the x-axis is stress, and the y-axis is performance or learning, right? Either one. And so if my stress, also known as arousal, is too low, I'm not going to learn a thing. I'm going to be in the back of the classroom planning my future, like playing a game on my phone. I'm not connected because I'm so relaxed about the subject matter. I'm not aroused by it at all. If I'm over-aroused, my brain shuts down. I'm too stressed out to hear a thing. Those are the situations where if we're so stressed out, we're trying to read what we're assigning our students. We've never read it before, but we're so stressed out, we're reading the same sentence over and over and over, right? When there's no performance. What we actually want to do is nudge the folks over here at the lower end into having some kind of arousal and lower the level of arousal or stress for the folks over here. And actually, there's a horrible term that, like, we all know the term distress, and most of us don't even know this weird little jargon term, eustress, EU, right? For happy. The Greek for happy, like euphoria, euthanasia. That's not that that's so happy, but that's the etymology anyway. So eustress, this is the kind of stress that we seek. We all love eustress. When people talk about states of flow, which results from 10,000 plus hours of doing deliberate practice and getting accurate feedback and making changes to that, and if we've done that long enough, then we can enter this place of high arousal and high pleasure, where athletes talk about, and academics as well, talk about being right in the zone, right in the zone. And we can let students know if all of us have overshot the mark and gone into production panic. All of us have. This is again something that none of us are immune to. And so being able to self-disclose about that is vital. There's a wonderful teacher, Pema Chodron. She's at Naropa, and she's a Tibetan Buddhist, and she has a book, a really, really tiny monograph, but you could actually get the transcript and a video of her online. She gave a commencement speech at Naropa a couple years back, and the monograph is called Fail, Fail Again, Fail Better. Fail, fail again, fail better. She's actually paraphrasing Samuel Beckett. And the idea is that I need to fail over and over again. Velvet and I are serious nerds. And on campus, we got a chance to hear one of the founders, one of the creators of a literary subgenre called steampunk. And steampunk is local. It came from Cal State Fullerton. And one of the authors was Tim Powers, as a graduate student, was a machine. He was getting short stories published here, there, everywhere. And the other two were like, dude, how do you do that? How do you get so many publications? And his answer is, oh, well, I think that for every single acceptance, there's a magical number of rejections that I have to get. My job is to get as many rejections as quickly as possible, so I can hit that magic number. It's like for salespeople, right? This is what salespeople do. So I think both reframing failure and talking about both its great opportunities and its great threats, and helping to buffer the threats and and really to help us embrace and I also believe that this is tied together with self-compassion. And one of the things that'll happen when you have mentors in the field, I was talking about layered mentoring. Here, one thought first. One of the things about having mentors in the field come and say, oh, me too, and I went this alternative route, and I can tell you of dozens of men and women here at Google or wherever they're at that can give you the same story as mine, that weren't Stanford, that weren't Bears, that were we just, I was a banana slug or whatever, right? But also with the layered mentoring, there's not enough time in the day to do everything that you and I want to do. There's just not. And the more that we could take somebody and mentor them, and have them mentor another, and have them mentor another. My vision for my university and my vision for your college is for everyone, staff, faculty, students, everyone to be mentoring someone. Everyone. And that way, if I'm mentoring someone who's mentoring someone else who's doing something in the community, then part of my energy drives the benefit, not just within my little classroom or my little department or my little university, but out into the community. And yes, it takes a lot of front-end energy to create layered mentoring, but the results are amazing. And that's one of the things I would highly, highly recommend for that situation. The other thing too is best practices with production problems. So because the suicidality and the depression that may or may not coincide with quote unquote writer's block, but it can. It certainly can, or production error, production problem, and I love the the best practice in the teaching of English, where for English composition, there are 3 different cognitive modes, and Peter Elbow talks about this in Writing with Power, where pre-writing is a different cognitive activity that interferes with and is interfered by with the writing itself, which also is a different cognitive activity that interferes with and is interfered by everything else, which includes the last thing, rewriting. And all too often, weren't we taught through grade school, junior high, high school, college, graduate school, weren't we all taught how to be binge writers? And part of why we're able to do what we do is that we've been good at it, except for the times that we were horribly bad at it. And fortunately for those of us in this room, the times that we were good at it was enough to get us where we are. But we all have our stories of production failure, all of us. And it's important for me to let people know that, let my students know that, so they can separate out those times, even when they're binge writing, so they can spend some time with rewriting, to clustering, the brainstorming, outlining, and then take a little, even if it's a bathroom break, a little walk around the block, and then switch cognitive modes into the actual writing. And while writing, not rewriting anything, not crossing things out, because that horrible thing is like the cursor going ding, 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 oh, backspace, or Control, Alt, Delete, right? And after many hours, ding, 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 the little cursor, like I've got nothing, as opposed to producing. And then again, once the draft is done, taking a walk around the block, having an apple, coming back, maybe have some peanut butter on there, so I've got a little bit of sugar, got a little bit of protein, and I come back and do the rewriting, ideally across time, but sometimes the same weekend. So most of you know about that, the composition model. But I also like the fact that most of the writing that we teach, there's another book that none of you need to read, that's really, really popular in business. It's a book called Getting Things Done. Fantastic ideas, horribly written. And the idea is this. The problem with making lists is that we have too many lists. We have like those of us, like part of being stressed and overloaded is I don't even know where my master list is that has all my sublists, and I don't even know where I put that list. And now I'm completely screwed. I've got no list. And what he'll do is he basically has you organize beforehand and figure out, break each task into micro tasks, and find tasks that you can do in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, in 15 minutes, half an hour, in an hour, so time length. But also, figure out tasks how much cognitive load does it require? What task can I do when I'm completely stressed out and I want to actually be binge watching, Gossip Girl on Netflix, and so something I could do while doing that, right? Or opposed to something where I need to have silence for an hour where I can just really hone in. And the task of writing anything involves really low effort, low cognitive, most of the writing is low effort, low cognitive load. For instance, writing my dissertation. One of the things, like right now we have such fantastic freeware and paid software they're usually called citation managers, but they're far more than that. So something like Zotero, which is free, which is very powerful, or something like EndNote, or RefWorks, which are paid and far more powerful. One of the things I ended up doing was every class I took for my first semester at USC in psychology, where there was something that interested me. Anytime I read something, I would immediately put it into my own words, in a sentence or two. Because as you all know, those of you who teach about plagiarism, you know that all of us plagiarize. All of us do it. And what we do is we do unintentional plagiarism. Because if we know a body of work, if we know a body of teaching, what happens is we learn the language of it, we learn the rhythm of it, we learn how to talk about it, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, as soon as we start talking about it, we're taking phrases and sentence structures that are straight from the author or students of the author, like other authors who have studied with that author. And so one of the best ways to prevent unintentional plagiarism is as soon as you read something, put it in your own words and write it down. We have our students in composition. We do that all the time. Put it in your own words. Put it in your own words. And when I work with graduate students or with high-performing students, undergraduates, one of the things I have them do is ask them how much energy does it take to put something into your own words. It's really a low cognitive load kind of thing. Well, it's high the first bunch of times you do it, but once you become good at it, it's a really low cognitive load kind of thing. And I have them do stuff like that. I have them start entering things into their citation manager so that they don't have to spend time while they're writing Chicago Manual of Style or APA Style or like putting something into a style format for citation. Again, really low cognitive load. I could be binging Mindhunter and playing that and doing that. And have like a poker game going on this computer, and breaking things up into and all that kind of chunking. I often provide the information about that straight out of Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, about how the very things that help us plan when it comes to external products really does damage when it's about emotional problems that we're predicting. Like, I don't think I can handle it is an emotional issue, is a cognitive issue. And so what I love doing is helping them to get right, to slice it. Can you just do this part? When I'm working with suicidal folks, can you just stay alive today? Or like they do in 12-step programs, can you just not shoot heroin today? Can you just yeah, but what about tomorrow? Don't worry about tomorrow. All you have to do is get to bed and not engage in that activity. Yeah, but what about, yeah, that's the problem. We mind trip on tomorrow, and that gets in the way of our living today. Can you just not do that today? Can you just do this one thing? There's that prayer, the Serenity Prayer, which is used in 12-step programs, but which is actually a really fantastic cognitive heuristic. Grant me serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, wisdom to know the difference. And if that's a guiding point for you, like for me, I love this prayer, and most of the time I use it agnostically because I have no idea if God is or isn't. I have no idea if what happened before I was born, what happens after I die. I just live as if certain things are true. And for me, my biggest problem is trying to change the things I can't and accepting things that are harmful that I could change, right? And I remember one time early on, I was calling a mentor of mine, and I'm bug nuts, and I'm right at the end of I'm right at the tail end of my dissertation writing stage, and I'm completely hopeless, and I'm on the phone screaming into the phone to this elderly woman who's helping me, going, I can't accept the things I cannot change, like this, right? I'm in that state. And she pulls one of these kind of spiritual paradox Jedi mind tricks on my ass, and she says, Hiroshi, because she's Japanese too, that's my full name. Hiroshi, can you accept that? She's a heavy smoker. Can you accept that? And like, what the fuck? Wait, what do you do? Wait a minute, you can do that? Yeah, try it. And what I found was that I had all this unacceptable stuff on board, but I was accepting that I was not accepting, which gave me such relief. What I love about the self-compassion piece is it allows me to have, this is a metaphor I've been working with this past week actually, and with all the demands at work and all my critical mind says, oh, they're not doing it right, and then I get judgmental, and then my critical mind says, you need to do something about it, and that gets me in trouble. And the metaphor that I'm working with is today what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to let the wanter want whatever the hell the wanter wants. I'm trying to let the fearer fear whatever the fearer wants to fear. And I'm trying my best to be here in the moment and do what I value and I do what I know is useful. Even if I'm hanging around with my fear buddy, the wanter buddy, the critic can hang out too. And where it's just like, yeah, thanks for sharing. Old friend, because in Zen circles they talk about inviting our fear in for tea. And I think in the West, my experience is that as a man of Japanese descent, growing up in the West, highly acculturated, that my gold standard of courage means being free from fear. And talking to any of the military men and women, talking to any first responders who go into danger on a daily basis, they're like, yeah, that's the kind of courage that we like to have. That's not usually the kind we have. The kind of courage we usually have is our fear is going along with us. It's in the fear backpack, but we've got the oxygen, we've got the other stuff too, and that's going to help us more. Right? And the fear does have its uses. It's going to keep me from doing something stupid, and my wife actually likes the fear, or my husband likes the fear, and it'll keep me from going into it and actually endangering my life unnecessarily. And which is the proper use of fear. So that was a long and roundabout way of kind of addressing multiple areas of those key areas of concern. Awesome. At some point, new knowledge pushes out old knowledge, and our body craves fuel, because you may not know it, but you've burned a ton of calories in here today. Thinking takes up a lot of calories. That's why not eating and trying to do some kind of work is actually a really bad idea, because we're depriving our brains of glucose that it uses to actually function and fire really well. So I know that there's lunch over there that's distracting, but I know that we were also scheduled for another 12 minutes to go. Is there anything else that I can do that will help you as you leave here for the rest of your day and as you go back and help your students?
I actually have a suggestion about students who are facing pressure from their parents. I love the idea of having events where people come in and say, that was the route I wanted to go, and I ended up not going that route. But I think the parents should be invited, encouraged, pressured to attend, because sometimes the student can't stand up to the parents, but if the parents hear another adult saying, this life turned out okay for me, maybe it'll sink into them.
Yes. I also believe whenever there are parent sessions and student sessions, I always believe, and that's a wonderful idea, I always believe that we should divide it. It should be a day, or even if it's half day, to divide up the time so that we have time with the parents and time with the students. And then so that the parents can hear from other parents who have lost children, who said, I was just doing my best. I was just doing my best. Because in my culture, it's that education is the gold standard of success, or what in my family's culture. And so for us, the more that we say, work on this, that's how my parents showed me love, and that's how we show love. When I had a chance to be teaching assistant to Dr. Ruth Chung, who I mentioned earlier, fantastic acculturation research, and she taught a class, an undergraduate class at USC that is ongoing, called Asian American Psychology, and I had a chance to be her TA in that. And one of the things that I got to work with the students on, all these East Asian students and Asian American students, was to learn that parents, all of our families have subtitles. And my belief is that all of the suffering that we have with our parents, if there is any, is a result of, and in both directions, is a result of not being able to read the subtitles. And the subtitles for a parent who may have low outward expression of warmth and high expression of demand. The words, yeah, you got A's in all these classes, but what's happening with this B? The subtitles might be, I love you. I love you, and I'm so afraid that you'll go out into this difficult world and it will eat you up like it's eaten up so many people I know. And I just want you to succeed. I want what's best for you. I want you to thrive in this world, and this is the only way. And I know that sometimes that pressure is so high that it feels like that my love for you depends upon your performance, and it's important for you to know that it never does. The things that so many of our parents can't say are the subtitles. And there's a clip that I like showing teachers and students and patients. It's a clip from the first season of the now finished show. It was on for a decade, of Rescue Me. I don't know if you know this show. It was a show with Dennis Leary with his caustic sense of humor. And the very first episode is the moments after 9/11. And he and his family are generations of firefighters, first responders. And he, of course, is an alcoholic firefighter, first responder to the Twin Towers. And there's in the third episode, about 17 minutes in, and you can Amazon it. It's either on Amazon or Hulu. You can check it out. There's this throwaway conversation that's amazing, and he's having a conversation with his dad, and the conversation looks like this. And there's subtitles on the conversation, so I had to turn off, the closed captioning for the hearing impaired. I had to turn off the subtitles because it got in the way of the subtitles that are actually on the show. And the conversation's going like this. The conversation is, "Hey, Dad, how you doing?" "I'm just watching the ball game." And, oh yeah, how's it going? And the subtitles is like, "Hey, Dad, I miss you, I love you." "I don't know, the pitcher's doing something. That catcher should just get bowl cancer." And "I love you too, son." And it goes on, and finally it's like, "Your mom's wanting something in the other room. Hey, I gotta go now, son." "Oh yeah, I gotta go too." And "I gotta go too." And "All right, bye then. All right, bye. And there's two ways of looking at this, I believe. One is they both know. They both know the subtitles. Because of the nature of the show, I don't think that it's that utopian. I think it's actually bittersweet, that this is what each wants to be able to hear and to say to the other. But because of culture, masculinity, they can't. They can't, and they never will. What we can do in those situations is help translate the subtitles.
Oh, sorry. I was going to piggyback back on what she was saying. In addition to the challenge of the parents and for local parents, getting them to come, which may or may not work. With me working with international students whose parents are, not here, that challenge is even more intense. I have some good news. I think lately I have begun to see that more parents are more supportive of their sons or daughters doing what they want to do, which, is fantastic news for me. Still, of course, there are the parents who are going to put those pressures on. So I think, working with the international students is equally or is more difficult. And with that pressure, how do you deal with that culturally, sensitively? Of course, I want to support the student in what they're choosing to do. But in supporting the student, I also have to respect the parents in that relationship. So that's an added pressure.
Thank you. So thank you for your question. And your question is basically with parents. The good news is some parents are supporting the autonomy of their children, your students, more so. But there are still many who do not. And how to both honor culturally and help with autonomy, personal decision making, while also not triangulating and encouraging them to go against their parents. I only have a. Maybe the best analogy is this. The foremost philosophers, thinkers, researchers in biomedical ethics are a pair called Beauchamp and Childress, and they have a book called Biomedical Ethics that's in, the 20-something edition. And in their discussion of the biomedical ethical principle of autonomy, so my ability to make my own decisions. There's a lot of multicultural and post-colonial criticism of that says, well, isn't this a Western thing? Isn't this a Western principle that we're just somehow laminating, colonizing, and forcing upon more collectivist cultures? And their response is elegant. What they said was that, well, if my choice is to follow the tradition and to engage in filial piety or familialismo, and to do what my family wants, even though there's a conflict within me and there's a part of me that wants to do this other thing, that too, if they decide to do that, that too is autonomy. The point at which those students are with me is where I help them make the ethical decision making. What's the most beneficial and the least harmful? What's the most just, which includes the collective of which I'm a part, more than it does me? What will allow me to engage in fidelity, faithfulness to my values, which is heavily influenced by and incorporates the values of my family and my ancestors? And the struggle where so many of those students, some of those students will be able to, with the support of their parents or without the support of their parents, will go into, I want to honor this autonomy. I want to step out and be a pioneer in this, in my family. And pioneering is fraught and lonely, and what we can do is support them in that, and also normalize this other grieving relationship and help them with their family. The other piece too is if they decide that they really want to honor the family, and then what we can do is help them to be okay with not being okay with letting the wanter want what the wanter wants. The wanter wants to go and be a musician. The wanter wants to let them know, look, all of us have a vocation. What we do for a living, but vocation, remember, comes from the Latin vocare, a calling. Whether it's a personal calling, I am called to do something for me personally, or I'm being called to do something familially. It's still a calling. And then all of us also have an avocation, and that term came up like a hobby or something that we pour our energy and our love into, that we usually think of the A as without pay. But for me, it's also instead it's a calling that calls me away from the calling that pays, and that we can still engage in that, we can still nurture that. So I believe that again, I don't know what the specific answer is, but we can have ethical guideposts that might be able to help. Beauchamp and Childress.
I'm fascinated because you keep mentioning Chung from USC. My mentor was Stella Ting Toomey from Cal State Fullerton. They have a lot of publications together. My area of emphasis is intercultural communication. And my recommendation is to avoid a Western cultural bias, to give the solution and say, oh, you just do you. Because I think you need to be mindful that our Western identity goals are not necessarily the same or more important than the family goals, whether it is Latin American culture or Asian American. And when I lived in Japan for 9 months, it really shifted my whole world. And that's before I became, into the study in that field. I remember I'd see kids sometimes sitting outside of the apartment, and I'd be like, what's happening? Why are they sitting outside and upset? That's how they were disciplined. It's taking them away from the family. Where here, they're in their room. You have to stay with the family. That is your punishment. It's taking away that freedom. And then the elevators also, or traveling. And, literally people had on the white gloves to physically close the doors. And then I realized their ride is just as important as my ride. Versus, at the elevator, you have that systematic nonverbal communication center, split, corners, fifth person in the middle, and then, it was again, preserving that space. And so many of these students, and they could be born here, suffer from this dual identity of never fitting in. Meaning, in their home, they might preserve their heritage and those cultural norms and the different contexts of communicating. But yet when they're in our classroom, they see themselves as a Mexican before an American, or it's because that's how they feel other people see them. And then when they go visit their culture of origin, then what happens there is then suddenly they're too American. And so they don't really fit in anywhere. And they really struggle with this paradox of, my parents see me one way, family see me as another, but when I go travel there, then I'm an outsider. So I always follow up with just questions and help them get to that place of solvency and happiness. But a lot of times I do hear from so many people with different workshops and seminars is, oh, it's about them, and sometimes their happiness is a collectivistic type of happiness. So I think it's just good to be mindful of not just our way of thinking of success and identity.
Thank you for that. So not being prescriptive in providing a answer or the answer, it's so weird because we often talk about ourselves as postmodern subjects, but we act as if we're modern, like we know the answer. And but as postmodern subjects, we know that we do have the answer. The answer is I don't have the answer. And what I've hoped that I've modeled for you is providing the personal experience and the science behind that can help, that has helped me and can help you and your students to navigate a middle road between these. And for a later date, for another in-service, it may be useful for me to present models to you and that I could just drop as things for you to look into. Things like one of the most important Bill of Rights to come out of the late 20th century is by a woman named Maria Root. She has two middle initials, P and P, which, makes the adolescent go, hee, 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 pee, pee. But Maria P. Root. And she has something called the Multiracial Bill of Rights. And it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And not that all of your students are multiracial, but it gives the idea, the old way of understanding acculturation was a zero-sum game. And the logic of a zero-sum game is, in order to gain something, I have to lose something else, right? And so the more American I become, the less Japanese I must be. And it turns out that they're, again, non-orthogonal. Americanness can be an x-axis, Japaneseness can be a y-axis. And even that is too rudimentary. With each aspect of worldview, with behavior, with preference, with value, with desire, we could have multiple axes and that go with each of these traits. And the problem with betweenness, the major problem with betweenness is learning how to navigate betweenness. Whether it's bisexuality, but whether it's being in a heterosexual world and navigating same-sex desire and same-sex identity, whether it's knowing how Mexican to be in one situation or how American to be in another situation, and this is just fraught in development. And part of what we get to do is we get to go, look, there's an entire psychology, a multicultural psychology of this, and look, it's absolutely normal. You're not a freak. There's a lot of people most people have multiple identities, and most people struggle with this in different ways. And one of the most beautiful things about the multiracial Bill of Rights is, which you could just find on the internet on your phone, is that I don't have to identify the way you identify me, the way my families identify me, the way you expect me to identify by how I look. But I could choose how I identify, and I could change it over time, and that's okay for me. Right? And it also rhymes with kind of the bisexual rights movement of the 90s, where it's like, you know what? Most people who behave or desire bisexually don't even identify as bisexual, and all of the microaggressions about bisexuality are about like, well, you just haven't grown up into a gay man, or you're just experimenting, and the confusion that about sexuality is that again it's the reaction axes. There's identity, there's behavior, there's desire. And the whole idea, the microaggression of bisexuality is, you know, you must sleep with a lot of people. And then so it's like, well, no, I'm monogamous. I'm a monogamous and I'm in a same-sex relationship. Wait, how does that work? Well, it's because I've got behavior, and this is my behavior. I've got desire. I've got a lot of desire. I just don't act upon it, which is what happens for everyone in a monogamous relationship. And then I have identity. Right? And so all of these different models are really, really useful. And then the one piece I really love that anthropologists talk about is code switching. Like when I work with gang members, I love the idea of like, okay, and they're like, no, I got to be real. Absolutely, you got to be real in different situations. And being able to, one model of mental illness is being either rigidly inflexible or, on the other side of mental illness, being chaotically flexible. Right, as opposed to being healthily flexible, you know, and so help you get out of this kind of rigidity into flexibility. And so you can code switch. You could be one. You know, I love the term code switch. You could be one way at home. You could be one way when pulled over by the police. You could be another way when you're with your homies. You could be another way when you show up to school. So I love the ideas that you brought up. That's wonderful. Thank you. I'm hungry. I bet you're hungry too. I've had so much fun hanging out with you guys. Thank you so much. This has been a treat.
Hero, thank you so much.
Treat.